Welcome to YSM Conversations, a gathering place for women who sense something deeper is calling. Together, we believe that the most profound adventures begin within, and that when women gather in deep conversation, something ancient and necessary awakens.
Open the door to a new conversation through generative listening, weaving together generations of wisdom and listening beyond the ears to restore the intelligence your body has always carried and integrate soulfulness into the adventure of your life. This is restoring and connecting to the deeper current running beneath it all.
We are YSM Conversations. Welcome home. Welcome back to YSM Conversations. We are YSM. I am Danielle YS here with Victoria McMahon. We're here for part 4 of our conversations on consciously completing. Today, we're diving into consciously completing with old systems or old paradigms that have been dissolving or destabilizing for a long time. We've been through this journey of consciously completing, starting out with rest and reconnection and what we really need in each moment, whether it's connection with life force energy or if our physical body is actually wanting to rest. Then we dived into pruning and letting go of things, patterns, ancestral ways of being that we no longer need. And also the other side of that, bringing back what has been pruned too soon. Then we dived into a deep conversation on the meticulousness and the messiness of being consciously complete with the work that we can't not do, and how we hone that skill and dive into the wholeness of who we are and what we are, which includes the masculine and the feminine. So today, as we are diving into consciously completing with old systems or old paradigms that have been dissolving for a while, we decided to start out by looking at patriarchal systems because they have been in place for a really long time and have been consciously destabilized for a long time. Victoria and I have been talking and feeling like we are really in this place where the destabilization of many generations of women and feminists and people who are seeing the wholeness of humanity in feminine and masculine are working to destabilize the system that does not see that wholeness. So whenever we look at systems that have been around for a long time or words that have been around for a long time and used for a long time, I like to go back to the origin. I like to go back to the dictionary and see what it originally actually meant. So when we think of patriarchy, we think of matriarchy, right? Because when you think of one system consciously completing, it's like, okay, what is left in the vacuum? Maybe the opposite. And what we found was really interesting. So the origin of the word matriarch or matriarchy didn't come about until the 17th century, and it comes from the Latin mother. But the really interesting piece of this is that it's what they call a false analogy of patriarch. And what that means is that patriarch or patriarchy came from ancient Greece, and there was a word for it. There was not a word for matriarch in ancient Greek society or matriarchy or a woman leader. It wasn't until the 17th century that a word was made up to describe a woman leader or a society or structure with a woman leader. And this is really interesting to us in so many different ways. And I will hand it over to Victoria for some reflections on this of why this is interesting. And we're kind of just going to dive in and weave together all these pieces. What's coming through?
Oh, I just grabbed my throat. It's the whole voice of the woman. Right? That there wasn't even acknowledgement of the promotion of the feminine voice, the feminine presence. And that doesn't mean that it didn't exist in time before the Greek culture, right? I know in my blood, in my heart, in my soul, that the feminine was very much in tune, in alignment with the masculine. The movie Wonder Woman, and they talk about the society in Wonder Woman of all of the women mutually taking care of the tasks. at hand and supporting one another and the cohesiveness of that culture. How would we have that story without that happening on the planet, right? It did happen in this way. And so I remember when we were reading in the dictionary about there not being a word, it fueled the rage that I think women instinctively, innately feel in their systems. Where is my presence? Where is my voice in a culture that is patriarchally laid out for us? And like you were saying, over different periods of time, women rising to say, we want to be integrated as a full society, holding the masculine and feminine energies intertwined in resonance with one another. And so this is another moment in time of that deep reflection and also activation, because what happened for me in that moment of feeling the rage of learning this for the first time, that nudging aspect that comes from the beloveds that I listen to in the deeper listening space of myself, were saying, yay, good. We want to bring this back into alignment in right relationship here on the planet as well. And by us feeling the amazement and the rage and the wanting something new, craving the return of this interwoven resonance of masculine, feminine, for me, it gives the space, the pause for this to actually now occur. And restore is a word that we used a lot, to restore the natural ordering. So I go back to another conversation that we had about generating comes out of the destroying and the new ordering that we've talked about in previous episodes, and how this patriarchal system is just another lens to view and operate. How are we operating within the consciously completing this system that no longer is in, and never was, in my opinion, in alignment with the whole of humanity, and at the same time creating a space and a pause for the restoration of the true resonance of masculine and feminine energies that are held within all humans, male and female, binary, non-binary. It's part of who we are.
And one of those pieces too, if we go back to the origin of the word matriarch, that is really rooted in a patriarchal system and a patriarchal way of thinking, that masculine and feminine are separate from each other, is the way that the word matriarch was created, where someone in the 17th century was like, oh, patriarchal. Well, what is a system for when a woman is leading? It must be matriarchal, the opposite. But the thing that we're realizing and bringing forth now, and what Victoria is speaking to, of consciously completing with the patriarchy, doesn't mean now we just swap out who's in charge. It doesn't mean let's just put a woman at the head and then it's going to be fine. The opposite of patriarchy is not matriarchy. The opposite of man is not woman. Really, what matriarchy, or what feminine nature is asking us to do, is that integration that Victoria is talking about. It's not swapping out who's at the head of the table. It's coming back into our sense of wholeness, which, because we've been so far onto the side of masculine, regardless of what your sex is, regardless of what your gender is, because we live in a patriarchal society, we've all been molded in a patriarchal system and being in a very highly masculine system. And so we've learned the ways of doing that. And so now it's like we're on the seesaw where we're really in that masculine, and we've been needing to come back into the feminine to start balancing it out. And for a while, it's like this back and forth of feminine, masculine, and tug of war system. And now what we're seeing is it's not about one or the other. That is causing all of the problems in our world, this othering of each other and saying it has to be one or the other. What we're seeing with a truly integrated system, which I do see as the feminine to be able to hold all of these together, is that integration. And it is a coming together to create something that is really, truly new, not just the same system, but with a different face. And that's the heroine's journey. And I think that's where we're at as a society, as a species, where the heroine's journey starts out with that disconnection from the feminine because we're over identified with the masculine. And then something big happens, a wake up call. We've had a lot of wake up calls recently. And then we have to reconnect with that feminine. And it becomes that seesaw where we're fighting to reclaim the feminine. And so that's where we get that anger, that fire, that being really pissed off and shunning the systems that we've been born into, probably over-pruning. And then at some point, this realization of it's not about the opposites. It's not about one or the other. It's about the coming together and the wholeness that we are supposed to have within ourselves, within our society, within our species, within our planet, within our consciousness. And then the final and probably the most important step that I see on the heroine's journey of coming back above ground in that integrated state and bringing that integration, that wholeness into the world itself, rather than just playing with it within ourselves and not actually bringing about the change that we need to see, these new structures, these new systems. And maybe it's not even a structure. Who knows? I'm curious what's coming through for you.
I was reading something, or I heard something pretty recently about the hero's journey and the heroine's journey. And this notion is Joseph Campbell is especially associated with the hero's journey. And this notion of being a part of a patriarchal culture, like patriarchy and matriarchy, coming along and being given the word matriarchy, coming out of the patriarchal culture to begin with. It feels like that's very similar to Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, that it was like, well, you can apply it to women as well. So then there was a woman who said, no, I don't necessarily think that it goes like that. And she created the heroine's journey, which looks really different in respect to how women feel and voice. There's the aspect of the masculine energy that's the hero's journey. And then there's the perspective of the feminine energies as the heroine's journey. And so it feels like that next step to consciously complete, to find how those two aspects come together to create the human journey. I'm just making it up as I go, but that sense that we're both aspects uniquely expressing from the perspective that we find ourselves in. And maybe there's another journey story that has yet to be written that feels more like a non-binary version that has to grow beyond the patriarchal system as well. I just thought of that notion. So of course, there probably is, and maybe it's been written and somebody can say, yeah, go see such and such and enlighten us on that. I'm really intrigued by that.
Thank you for saying that. The image that comes through to me, because the heroine's journey and the hero's journey are depicted as circles and cycles. And so the image that comes to me when you're saying the human's journey is an infinity sign of just like the coming together. And maybe even that is rooted in a patriarchal, like, oh, two circles come together to make an infinity symbol. And maybe they come together to make something else that is in a higher level of consciousness than I'm thinking right now.
I'm going to go with you on the higher level of consciousness, because when the one circle crosses and the other circle crosses, and in the middle, this sacred union of the two blossoms. And is that not what we're after? We were talking in part 3 about the sacred dance. And that feels really pertinent to how we're speaking of two perspectives of journey, that one is equal in balance and harmony and symmetry and proportion, and that it's where they come together is the union. So how interesting that what gets created in the union, in the yoking, like yoga
Mhm.
tradition would say.
I love that. What gets created in the union? Something that we do already know, but not consciously. We know it in our consciousness, but we don't know it consciously in our minds yet.
Like we spoke to earlier, is it what we are seeking to restore that used to be here, and we're seeking to bring it back and restore it. And when I think about that intersection point, for me, that intersection point is what moves us beyond our current circumstance, our current thinking, our current feeling. That is that consciousness rising out of the completion of the old systems that no longer operate, that are not operating in balance, in harmony. Like you said, the matriarchy, they considered it the opposite, and it's really this mutuality that you spoke to. And we just made up in a conversation, I remember we just made up the idea of, instead of multitasking as women, we're mutual tasking, where we want to get to that place within ourselves where men are tasking on behalf of women and women are tasking on behalf of men. And so then it becomes on behalf of the whole. That just seems, that popped in. So there you go. Back to you.
And I want to add in, it's not just men on behalf of women. It's not just women on behalf of men. It's human on behalf of human, regardless of what you're identified as. Because again, we have all of it within ourselves. It's just a matter of how we're expressing it, how we're allowing ourselves to express it, and the separation or the union that we see. Whether we see ourselves as separate from another being or whether we see all of us being a being and part of the same fabric, right? It doesn't matter what we identify as or even what other people identify us as. We're all here.
So you remember in part 3, we talked about what is the work you can't not do? I'm recycling that one, and I'm going to say, what is the being you can't not be?
Oh, say it again.
What is the being you can't not be?
Love that. I think that's a beautiful place to close.
I think it is too. And it feels like we've just carved out a little niche of what this conversation is. And so we would love for you guys and gals and peoples to share with us, what does it bring up for you? What is rising and what do you see consciously completing in the world? And how do you see this system moving and shifting towards something that is mutuality, that is the full expression of who we are as we are? And there may be more to come in these conversations, like digging in a little deeper. Feels like that's gonna happen. I don't know when, because Danielle and I are always listening for what is the next rising. It's not like this linear outline. It's what wants to be in conversation with us. And so inform us how you're in conversation with today and the whole series of 4 episodes that we have done lately on this consciously completing. And we'll see where we go from here. Thanks as always for being with us and your time and your attention. And we'll see you for the next episode. Thank you for diving deep with us into generative listening. If this episode stirred something in you, subscribe to keep restoring with us. And if someone came to mind while you were in your own generative listening, share this episode with them. Because when women gather, something ancient and necessary awakens.
We are YSM Conversations, connecting back to the deeper currents on behalf of seeding our next collective wholeness.